All right. Well, actually, good afternoon, all the folks on at least the East Coast, and morning to anyone else in the U.S. Brandon Garrett with the National Minority Equality Forum here, and this is Friday, so we're doing our Friday webinar. We'll do a bit of housekeeping first. So, webinar is going to start. If you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box, and if you want to just keep the conversation going with any ideas or things you want to let other folks know about, please put it in the chat box as well. We'll keep that going. One just quick announcement for me, as you know, April is Minority Health Month, and at the end of April, we host our annual summit on health disparities. We started that in 2003. And so we'll have this one this year, April 28th and 29th at the Conrad Hotel in Washington, D.C. If you're interested, Ashley will go ahead and put that information in the box. And one thing we announced at that conference on the last day is our 40 under 40. And interestingly enough, it's a full circle moment here because we have two members of our 40 under 40 that are participating in this webinar. And we were talking about this earlier. They're in our first class. So I'll at least introduce one of them, who's Shyrea Thompson, who's been working with us for at least, obviously, the last 10 years. And she is a member of the NMQF's advisory board. We sort of call on her for everything, whether that's working on continuing education programming, hosting webinars, doing some communication stuff, because she has been doing great work, especially in the cancer space for at least longer than the last decade. And so I will do that, and then I'll let her introduce her panel and let you guys get educated today.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Brandon. I'm excited to be here. I know that some of us are experiencing fake spring, and it's nice that at least we got some peaks of sun. And I'll let the panelists tell you a little bit more about where they are hailing from today. I'm here in the Washington, D.C. area, and we're excited to kind of do it a little bit different. This is going to be kind of like a 101, where if you wanted to learn more about the supply chain and how pharmaceutical distributors are keeping healthcare moving, this is the right place to be this Friday. So if you have questions that might be basic, feel free to put them in. If you have a higher level, these are two experts that are working across the field and bring a bevy of community health and public health information as well to these roles. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, I'm Shyrea Thompson, and I'm excited to be here with you and joined by Dr. Nicolette Louis-Saint, excuse me. I'm trying to make sure I'm enunciating everyone's name correct. And she is the Chief Policy Officer at the Healthcare Distribution Alliance. She's going to talk a little bit more about her role there and share a bit about her career. And we're going to also learn from her colleague, Jada Lynn, as well, who's the Director of Industry Relations, also at the Healthcare Distribution Alliance. So I want to thank you both for joining me, and happy Friday to everyone.
Happy Friday.
Happy Friday. So before we get started, I want to just remind you, if you haven't had a chance to introduce yourself, please do so in the chat. There's a community here. You may connect with someone that has a resource. We'll be sharing some as well that the experts have provided. And as Brandon said, feel free to put your questions in the Q&A box. So we're going to go ahead and start with our first question. We wanted to make sure that everybody kind of had a full understanding of the ecosystem in the landscape. So who better to start us off than, if you don't mind, I'll call you Nicolette for the rest of our chat.
Sure.
All right, perfect. So Nicolette, can you tell us a little bit more about what you do and about this healthcare ecosystem?
Sure. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for moderating, Shy. Great to be with you this afternoon or morning, depending on the time zone. So the healthcare ecosystem, I'm actually going to back into my role at HDA, but the healthcare ecosystem, and as I think about the healthcare supply chain, there are kind of two ways to think about the supply chain. One is how the product flows, and the other is how the money flows. Those are not necessarily the same. So you will have different players that play a role in facilitating the movement of product in the supply chain. Similarly, you'll see the flow of money kind of goes in both directions, and it can be complicated. Anyone who's tried to have, a prescription filled and has dealt with their insurance company understands that the movement of money in the supply chain can be complicated. But when we're thinking about how the product flows in the supply chain, that is a more straightforward system, I would offer. We are often familiar with the R&D process or the process of innovation, and we think about the ability for innovation to bring novel products to the market. But we all will know someone who is also dependent on a quality generic, a statin, for example, an anti-diabetes drug, a metformin or something of that nature, that is also sustaining their chronic disease. Those products move through the supply chain, starting with manufacturers, whether they be branded or generic, manufacturers who are making those products. They are making those products in different parts of the country, different parts of the world. Those products are flowing into the United States. They're being purchased by pharmaceutical distributors, and those are the entities that we work with day in and day out. They are purchasing that product. They are taking legal and financial responsibility for that product. We often refer to it as taking title. And then they are managing the process of having all of those products from 13 to 1,500 manufacturers, actually moving every day to about 300,000 facilities across the United States. We think about pharmacies. There are also primary care offices. There are hospitals and health systems that are relying on those products. There are clinics, there are dental offices. So there truly are a full range of facilities. One of the things that we don't often talk about, but is a reality, is that those products have to be delivered every single day, partially because we will see fluctuating public health needs throughout a week, right? So depending on what patients a provider may plan to see, what procedures are scheduled, they will make their orders and adjust. That also allows for them to not have to hold too much product on site, which can be a safety and security issue. So again, just thinking about the way the product moves, it is very distilled in the way that I'm presenting it, but thinking about the products being innovated and made, that product being transferred and sold to pharmaceutical distributors, and then the distributors doing that work of then branching it out and getting it to those 300,000 facilities every day.
That was excellent. You kind of did the how a bill becomes a law version, making sure we all understand. But it means a lot, right? You may be looking at accessing something that, to your point, is at a pharmacy, and
Yeah,
that's the only point of access for you. And it might also be something that you get over the counter and you need. I'm dealing with allergies right now.
exactly.
And I think it's the time of year where, to your point, there are lots of things that we reflect on that do impact our lives in this space. And one of them we were talking about earlier, is this is the time of year with the COVID pandemic that many people are reflecting on when we first were looking at those states of emergency. So the work that you do is so important. And we want to hear a little bit more. Jadalyn, if you would like to share about your role and how it actually impacts this space as well.
Absolutely. I look at this as like the schoolhouse rock version of the pharmaceutical supply chain. What is this? We don't talk about this in our families and our homes often, but there's a little bit more to this process than just going to the pharmacy and picking up your prescription. I serve as a director of industry relations here with HDA, and it's a unique position for me. I sit in the middle of a lot of it. We do a lot for our membership in terms of advocacy, education, convening, educating others within and outside of the supply chain of what's going on. We digest a lot of information coming from the regulatory and the legislative processes that inform us on what should be done to make sure that these drug products get from point A to point B. So, in my role, I really am lucky to be able to sit and hear from our leadership like Nicolette and understand what's going on the legislative space, and how our legislators are pulling together their resources and understanding of uh, everything from the cost of drugs to national emergencies and how we respond to it, and getting that information to our members so they can understand how this interacts with their operational processes. So, in industry relation, I'm a team of two. We really take all of that information in and we weigh it. We talk. We're able to talk with our membership, which is primarily the distributors, the ones that's transporting these drug products and getting them to the pharmacies, from their suppliers to the pharmacies. The middlemen, as we like to say sometimes in our industry, they're the reason why, you know, you can go to the pharmacy and pick up your medication because they made sure it got there. So we're really working with them to understand how these laws impact their operations. And there's a lot that goes into that. When regulations are created, there's a whole process in terms of implementation, how to break down regulation, when to put it into effect, and how that impacts all parties involved. It's not a industry that works in silos, that one company can do one thing and it has no direct relation on another. Everything works in tandem in this industry, where if one person is doing it, most likely everyone needs to do it. And in industry relations, we really help bridge those conversations amongst members to make sure everyone is understanding and operating in a similar fashion so the system doesn't break.
That is a timely point. I think we all could benefit from more of that across the board in many spaces. I want to, before we go to the next question, just clarify if someone's kind of coming in for the first time, I'll drop one of the first resources in the chat. When you say them and our members, can you give us a feel, if you can't name names, but what are the types of people, individuals, organizations, entities? What are the them that you're referring to that you work with?
I'm happy to start, Jadalyn. Let me know what I missed. So
Okay.
our members, one of the things that I thought was so interesting when I joined HDA, is that the Healthcare Distribution Alliance might be one of the oldest trade associations in the United States. So outside of my office, there's actually a pamphlet from a meeting in the 1800s that was held when the organization existed as the National Wholesale Druggists Association. So I bring that up to say that the part of the industry that we're working with is as old as the nation itself. Who our members are those entities that are taking the responsibility of taking that title and moving those products. They are pharmaceutical distributors, and in full transparency, we're happy to share names. Those are not necessarily the most visible names in the healthcare ecosystem that folks recognize. However, if you next time you go to your doctor's office, look and see if you see McKesson gloves. Look and see when you're getting your next vaccine, if it's a Cardinal Health syringe. You will see those are names of our members. Henry Schein is one of our members as well. Value Drug Company based in Pennsylvania, another important member of ours. Morrison-Dixon in the Southeast actually has extensive experience dealing with hurricanes and hurricane response and supporting the Southeast and getting resumptions of care in the Southeast because of their location in Shreveport. So we do have about 40 members. I just think it's very interesting when I came even to HDA to head up our policy function, realizing that so many of our members do such critical work, but they're not organizations that we hear about or talk about often when we're thinking about how healthcare operates.
That's really insightful. And I think what you're kind of bringing to life is that ecosystem. So we're going to, I think, learn a little bit more if you can share with us about the journey of a drug or your product. I love that example about gloves because, you know, healthcare is not just about what you consume or what surgery you're getting, right? There's a lot of pieces that go into it. So if you can tell us more about that production to patient use. So what does that look like long before it gets to us as patients?
Sure. So I do feel like this is the schoolhouse rock, Jadalyn. It's exactly right. I'm seeing like how the pill gets made. So it's funny, I actually did a lecture yesterday and was talking about the fact that oftentimes when we're thinking about medical products, we think about pills. But now we're also talking about biologics and biosimilars, which are actually cell-derived products, protein-based products that are playing a role in medical intervention. So those products are manufactured I never want to lose sight of the fact that those products first have to be innovated, whether that is something that is more than 100 years old and is known technology, or something that just hit the market. That innovation step is incredibly important. And I know NMQF does a lot to talk about R&D and the diversity in clinical trials. And so that is informing that stage, which will lead to the production of an FDA-approved product. That product will then be manufactured, and that manufacturing process can involve multiple countries. It can involve multiple steps, and then it gets to what we refer to as fill finish. That's when the pill is made and put in a blister pack and put with that package insert that nobody reads and sealed up in that box. And that is the product that is then sold and transferred to a pharmaceutical distributor. Pharmaceutical distributors will then take that product. They're going to take a lot of product from various manufacturers. So they're not sitting in it like we think about what we get from the pharmacy as like that was delivered. But though, you know, those big bottles, those boxes that are then broken down to be able to be dispensed, that's what a pharmaceutical distributor is going to get. And they're doing that based off of demand signals, based off of public health needs, based off of what their communications are with both their suppliers as to what's available, as well as the downstream providers as to what they're needing and what they see. And I know there have been some questions about shortages that we'll get to. That product is then going to be our favorite 3 words are pick, pack, and shipped. So based on that order that comes in, those products that are going to come in, think about it like your Instacart order. You're saying, okay, I need some of this and a little bit of this, and nope, I'm going to get 2 of these, and ooh, this looks like a busy time, so let me throw in some gloves and, you know, a couple extra ibuprofen here and some statins, and ooh, I think I have a couple more patients coming in. I'm going to need some Humira. Whatever that order is, that order is placed normally by 4 p.m. the day before. Overnight, those orders are picked, packed, and then shipped. And that shipment is going to make it to that facility by 8 a.m. the next day. So that is typically how the process of how the Schoolhouse Rock version of how a pill gets to the patient. That product will then be with a prescription dispensed by a provider. A physician will make the prescription. A pharmacist is normally responsible for dispensing that product in various healthcare settings, and that is how that product is going to reach the patient.
I love that. My cancer patient navigation background really comes into play when you think about so many of these innovations that have to be stored a certain way, right? I need to take this when it's cold and it needs to
Yes.
stay cold when it gets to me. And I remember in the early days, right, when you're learning and really trying to make sure that the patients are getting the best delivery of care. It's incredible to think about the work that you're outlining. And in some ways, right, people might just see that or not see it, right? Oh, it's a middleman. But that is a very important key part to this process, especially if you're a patient. So, Jalen, I'm going to ask you a little bit more about what you would say. I feel like I can see what this means to patients, but not just patients, policymakers, and even healthcare providers. And what would you say is really the importance of the work that you're doing to these groups?
Absolutely. And I think a lot about my previous experience when I sit in this space. Public health background. I came from community health. I worked in a community wellness center. Yeah, oh yeah, in Chicago, right during the COVID crisis, and a lot of our effort was educating patients, the recipients of these vaccines, the ones that was going and trying to understand, what is this COVID test? Am I going to get COVID from taking this test? What is this vaccine? Who is, Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson, trying to figure out what their options were. And I kind of wish I had this position first because a lot of the education that patients require about just understanding the pharmaceutical world, the pharmaceutical industry, and what goes into taking their medication is derived from our understanding of this space. And I think that's what gives me the passion and the motivation to get up and every day sign into my meetings and do this work because it's so important. You know, knowing that I could put a face to the manufacturers of some of these medications, and when I'm describing it, I still do a lot of work in the community. So when I'm describing some of these things, I can see the faces of some of the representatives of those manufacturers companies, and it's not just a company; it's that individual that I work with every day and the passion that he has kind of breathing through me to help someone else understand and explain to them. And it goes to the same into the legislative process, humanizing the fact that this is more than just a drug industry. This is very intimate and personal. When we kind of level set many of our meetings internally to say, hey, we're a patient. I mean, I went to the pharmacy yesterday. We're a patient. We're participants of this industry that we work in. This is more than just a box of pills and, the distrust that goes along with some of the things that we've experienced in the healthcare industry. There's a purpose behind it, there's a plan, and there's someone meticulously following operational procedures and laws and regulations to, like you said, make sure that temperature controls were there to ensure that that medication safely made it to the pharmacy and that it wasn't tampered with or that it wasn't left in conditions that would make that medication ineffective for you. So, a lot of what we do and how it informs the patient, it really goes back to us as a personal individual. I think many of us in this space, we're better for being here because when we have those questions coming from our families and our communities, we have a greater sense of understanding of what's happening behind the curtain to explain to them, and as well as our legislators and inform them from the patient perspective and also the operational perspective of what our members are doing and what we know the manufacturers and even some of the stories that we get from the dispensers who work with us, the pharmacists that work with us, the legal components. There's so much that goes into it that it's a very intricate industry. And being able to kind of interact with all layers of it, it makes you a better patient advocate. It makes you a better patient and a better family member too when your family has those questions.
Yes, don't we always become the super
Yeah.
caregiver? Yes, yes,
Absolutely.
I definitely understand that. Well, I know that one of the things that is also true is that during emergencies, right, whether it be a pandemic, a fire, you name it, there are different things that we are experiencing across this country at different times. And I'd love to learn more, Nicolette, about how you operate in steady times and also in emergencies. And feel free to share about your background. It's incredible. I think that lens that you're bringing from that work into this, I'm sure, to your colleague's point, Jadalyn, right? Not only humanizes, it gives you kind of that superpower.
Absolutely. So I am a trained clinical pharmacologist. My specialty is in infectious diseases. So I have always been running after and trying to understand disease outbreaks in my career and understanding the pharmaceutical interventions that could be used for disease outbreaks. I transitioned out of the lab and the clinical trial setting and actually went into pharmaceutical trade and did some work in pharmaceutical trade, science and technology policy, that kind of thing, which sounds unrelated until you start to think about the fact that there are, and I think right now there's so many conversations about trade policy that we don't fully appreciate that there are so many global agreements that govern how we are innovating, where we are able to do research, and how the drugs that we need are able to flow into our communities. I then transitioned into an emergency management role and for about 10 years worked as an emergency manager, which was a surprisingly natural progression from working on infectious disease outbreaks, which I didn't fully appreciate as a type of emergency. And I led an organization named Healthcare Ready for about, I think, 6 or so years, many of those years being in COVID. One of the interesting things about the role that I have now is that the distributors were one of my key partners in all of those positions. When I was at the bench and doing research, I relied on the distributors to get me products that I needed, that would be cold chain products, that would be time sensitive products to be able to do my studies. When I was actually dealing with infectious disease outbreaks, one of the key questions we would have is, how do we understand the stability of this product, recognizing that we would have to deliver this product, whether it was sub-Saharan Africa, and we're thinking about, okay, how do you move product when you're dealing with 42 degrees C? Or it's thinking about, okay, how do you move product when it's cold chain and power is out in this community in the Southeast? All of these things were considerations. So one of the things that I've always appreciated about the capabilities that distributors have in the United States is that while we are sitting in our homes and there's probably no major disaster, I pray, happening in your backyard, there is something going wrong in any part of this country on any given day. There is some disaster that is being declared in some local jurisdiction, some state at any point in time. There's just that much stuff happening. And there are some people that run when they see me coming because they feel like there's a doomsday thing coming their way. And I do understand it. But that's just a reality. If you look at the number of disaster declarations, you will also agree that bad things happen often. And it's a matter of how we prepare for them. The reason I bring that up is because sometimes we're so focused on trying to think about how we get as many products and assets and resources into a particular community that we forget that we need to make sure that those products can flow to all of the communities that need them on any given day. And that's actually why distributors have been such a critical partner, because in those disasters, one of the things that they're able to do is flow product across the United States based on the need. So you may see a medical surge that's happening in Maine or Vermont in response to an event, and you may also see an event that's happening in California. And what they're able to do is say, okay, it's not that the product has to right now be in Maine or California. It's that we have to figure out how to get it there in 12 hours or less. We have to figure out how we can use the next 24 hours to flow product from Minnesota or Puerto Rico or wherever, Texas, wherever it is, to be able to get it there. And that's a big part of what they do. So when we're thinking about emergencies, part of the conversation on resilience is, how do we ensure that those abilities that they have day in and day out that are a part of their steady state operations at this point can be sustained, and that we're not creating policies that impede their ability to make this investment. One of the things that we talk about a lot in HDA is the fact that our members on average have 0.3% margins after tax. So that is not a lot of wiggle room to be able to make massive investments. And so when you're thinking about how policies can impact their ability to invest in resilience, there's actually a big sensitivity to the fact that anything that's going to impede on those 0.3% margins could be a problem as it relates to the type of buffering that they do, the resilience that they're able to implement in a part of their role. And then you think about things like COVID, where that type of shock that I was talking about that can be local is happening everywhere at the same time. And you need the ability to be able to do forecasting. That's something that distributors do extensively. They're looking at what's happening across the globe to anticipate, okay, if it's in Australia now, how long before it's getting to the EU? How long before it's getting to the US? What does this mean in terms of how we work with suppliers to see if they can create more product, if they're able to plus up their manufacturing? How do we make sure that we're having communications with our downstream customers so that they understand what we're seeing, and they understand that we may be making adjustments to the amount of product that we're flowing, because we want to make sure that everyone is getting the product that they need. So that equitable distribution of product comes up a lot. So those are the types of things that we see, but also making sure that we maintain partnerships with the government, because while we are thinking about the role of the private sector, right? The role that distributors have in working with across the supply chain to be able to get products through, there's also a really important role that the federal government and that state and local governments have in emergencies as well. And so making sure that we have those relationships in place, that they understand who we are, what we do, that we also are making sure that the policies that are put in place allow for our members to take care of their employees. That's a really important part of this also. I can't tell you the number of times after a hurricane, the first thing we've heard our members say is that they're hiring private investigators because they need to track down their employees. They want to make sure that they're okay. And if there's any type of unmet need, they have to address that first, and then they will, focus on resumption of operations. So it is very complicated. And when you're thinking about emergencies, I always think that I want to work with people who are not panicked in the emergency, who are trained enough, skilled enough, and know what to do when the emergency happens, not people who are scrambling to figure it out as it's going on. And so that's why I think those capabilities are so important. And I think it's important that they're able to test those and practice those every day in their day in, day out operations.
Yes, that's so true. You know, the adage, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready.
Exactly.
So I think that's what you're looking for, whether it's your colleague or your partner. And I love, when we think about resilience, sometimes, yes, if you're one of those people that are squeamish, maybe it might make you sweat. But there's value in resilience, right? And the ability to make sure that we're thinking about how the benefits come through for people. And the word that I kept hearing while you were talking is access. And I think that that's really exciting because at the end of the day, again, going back to we're all people, we all want to have access to these things, right? And these innovations that make a very big difference for our communities. So exactly to that point, just because someone else is having an emergency doesn't mean that I may not still need this as well. So let's think about kind of how you got into this work. And also when you think about what you love, I know Jadalyn, you had shared that at first, but I thought about this. I mean, you kind of teased a little bit about who is good for this field, who's a great fit, who might not be a great fit. But I know we've got some folks joining us today that I think are also early career folks. And so that might be a great insight to share. And in the chat, I'm going to share the link to your career center. So I don't know if Jadalyn wants to start or Nicolette, but let us know a little bit more about how you started. And in our prep, Jadalyn, you shared a little bit about how you connected with Nicolette. So if you don't mind, I think that's such a great example of the connections in this space. So I'll let you guys go.
I'll jump in, and I appreciate you. You're sharing all of the links that kind of give people that teaser as to what HDA is, what we do, and how they can get involved through our career center. Um, it's funny because I came to HDA in a very roundabout way. I started out my academic career in political science, and I was introduced to this world of emergency preparedness through none other than Dr. Ellen Cannon at Northeastern Illinois. She's like a superstar to me. But I really did. I became fascinated with the idea of understanding the emergency and dissecting it from the place before it happens. What do I need to know? How do I need to prepare? What legislative processes need to be enacted, FEMA, all of these different organizations that need to be informed and be a part of the process of getting a community through an emergency. I just thought it was brilliant. And at the time, and still today, my interest was in maternal and child health. When we're talking about women and babies in the labor and delivery process, what does that look like to prepare women and children to brace for an emergency in such a vulnerable time? And that took me to my graduate studies. I got my master's in public health from Meharry Medical College. And it was right around that time that I attended APHA, very well known conference. And I'm looking for resources and, trying to connect with people who can help me understand how does emergency preparedness marry with minority communities and maternal and child health. And I met Dr. Nicolette there. Who knew years later that HDA would have this position that kind of really puts me right in the middle of understanding the policy, the work, the operations, and the key players, the stakeholders in this space. Again, stumbling across the position, I had been out of contact with Nicolette for years before I saw the position, and I saw a familiar face. So it kind of just seemed like fate brought me into this position, brought me into this space. But really just the commitment and passion to understand how this all works so that we can all, at the end of the day, make it through a emergency situation. Working on the west side of Chicago through a lot of the issues with not just health equity and access, but also during the pandemic where there was a lot of confusion and misunderstandings about different choices in vaccinations, it just became very uh, obvious to me that it's not necessarily a need for me to do something, but it's a need for me to learn something so that I can share. And I think that's why I'm here. That's the passion that leads me to stay active in this space, because we advocate for our members, but on the personal level, I advocate for communities. I advocate and share education and resources to communities. So that's a little bit about me and how I kind of stumbled my way into this field by fate. I like to say it's fate. God intended for me to be here. But that's why I love doing what I'm doing. I have access to all of this information and resources that make me a resource to those who need it.
I love that. That's excellent. Nicolette, would you like to share? I know you've shared a bit about your background, but how do you feel you got into this field? Or if you feel like you've already covered it, what do you love about your work?
Yeah, I think it's funny. Jadalyn likes to make fun of me because I really don't like talking about myself. So I will mention the Career Center and talk about what I actually love about the work. I was listening to Jadalyn reflect on her path, and I think there's so many through lines with what she shared with why the Career Center is so important. We started this talking about the fact that this is an industry that's not commonly known. If you ask most people who end up in supply chain, and especially on the distribution side, they probably did not intend to. Like, I don't know too many people who went to school and said, like, I plan to work in pharmaceutical distribution. And so I think it's important to think about the fact that this is an industry that's continuing to grow. It's not as if, the role and importance of medicines and medical products in the United States is going away anytime soon. And so a part of what our team has been working on has been rolling out this career center so that there are these opportunities that are put in one place that allows for people who might not have ever heard about distribution or potential jobs in supply chain to see what exists and to be able to apply. And we have members of our team that have been going around to HBCUs and HSIs and have actually been working really hard to figure out how do they get this integrated into the career center processes at those schools, because these are opportunities, and these are opportunities to impact communities as well. And so for me, that's a part of what I enjoy, is that I really love the fact that what we're doing impacts patient care. It impacts the ways that products are delivered. And for me, that is something that's always been important. I remember being at a really early stage in my career and trying to decide between going to medical school and graduate school or an MD PhD program. And while I wish these things on no one, like, those are not easy decisions to have to make, much less when you're 20 years old. I think for me, one of the things that I kept thinking about was where I wanted to make impact. And I wanted to know that the impact that I would make would impact people who didn't have to know my name or have an appointment with me. They didn't have to, credit me or, my name with something to know that systems were going to be impacted by the work that I was able to do. And so for me, that's what took me on this path. And that's why I think this is so important, because you don't have to know HDA's name or know a distributor's name or the policies that we're working to put forward to know that continuity of care is really what we're trying to sustain. It's not about the notoriety in it. It's not about the name recognition or the glory. It's about the fact that we know that communities, especially those who have seen historic disinvestment, are going to have a disproportionate need for medical continuity of care. And so that means we can't have a health system that has a clinic on a corner with maybe some trained physicians and no medicines, no gloves, no syringes. We need healthcare that's able to meet people where they are. And that's, for me, the important part of this work, is that we're not thinking about delivering care to a certain few. We're thinking about delivering care to the entire nation.
Yes, that's excellent. I keep thinking, right, you're way makers, whether it's in the supply end or you're making a way for communities. And even today, right, by sharing your journey, and I love what you're doing with HBCUs and other communities, because you're so right. I always joke growing up, I was told, and my field has just been very vast, but I'm passionate about advocacy and the work that I get to do for patients on that end. But I was always told, oh, you could be a teacher, you could do education, or be an attorney. And I'm like, right. And so there's a lot of things in between. And so thank you so much for sharing, because sometimes if you don't see it, you don't know that you can be it. And with that in mind, I know we've gotten a number of questions. So thank you for pre-submitting to the audience. And there is one in the chat. So I'm going to try to balance our time and make sure we can get through as many as possible. We're going to start with a question that actually is very relevant to the work I do as well. We know everything is digital these days, right? So how are you leveraging digital tools to improve the pharmaceutical chain supply?
I feel like Jadalyn should start because this is a perfect tee-in for DSCSA.
Yeah, so thanks, Nicolette. You said the word. I remember us talking about like, oh, what keeps you up at night, DSCSA. Um, so a lot of what we do in industry relations is around DSCSA and trying to make sure that all the systems are in place to follow this regulation that's going to allow the security of the supply chain to be intact. That we know that we are working with authorized trading partners. ATPs is another huge acronym in our field, that we know that we are working with people who are actually equipped and licensed to transport drugs. And a lot of technology goes into that. Verifying your trading partners, verifying products. A lot of what I do, I kind of sit in the seat where I get the the opportunity, I'm going to call it an opportunity, to sit with some of the solution providers that hammer out the details and the infrastructure behind the technology that allows trading partners to speak to one another about drug products. It's embedded in the very process of interoperability. Being able to make sure that the drugs are flowing in an interoperable manner, which is a requirement of the law. When they're transacting data, that they're able to share it in an electronic manner. We're not using paper and fax machine, or at least we shouldn't. We're transporting this transaction information with integrity to our solution, our trading partners, so that they can understand that they have a legitimate drug in hand and that it's coming verified from the manufacturer to the distributor to the dispenser. That flow is captured in that transaction data. So yes, we're always there's so much technology in this field, and even the safety of the technology in the space. You know, we have a lot of conversation about the resiliency of the technology. You know, if we're not speaking to one another in an electronic and interoperable manner, how does that put us in potential space for shortage, put us in potential space for us not to be able to keep drug product moving through the supply chain. So, so much of what we do has come into this electronic space that it's unavoidable. I think that's just the signs of the time. We're not doing things via snail mail anymore. We're not doing things via fax. And, you know, in some instances, we have to pick up the phone and probably do an email. But for the most part, we're moving into technologies that allow us to have that rapid transmission of information so that we can have those quick responses to critical events like Nicolette was speaking to.
Yeah, that sounds key. Nicolette, did you want to chime in on this as well?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is that the role of technology really is playing a role at every step in the supply chain. I think about 20 years ago, and it's been innovated since, we started to have these digital tools that we would actually be able to put into packages. So the packages of medicines, those totes, actually can be monitored for temperature. They can be monitored for pressure. Now we can sense whether or not packages have been disrupted before they were supposed to be opened. There are trackers on those so that if there is by any chance a diversion or that trucker goes in a path that we didn't know, there's an alert that goes on to say, hey, did you get lost? Like, we need to get you back to where you need to be, or is something wrong? And so I think those are all those, small ways that we're actually working to make sure that the supply chain is not just secure, but also that the integrity of the products is maintained along the process.
Yes, especially in this field. I think that's such a great point. So you kind of highlighted some of the initial challenges. I heard the mention of what keeps you up at night. And there's a question I'm going to kind of toggle back and forth between the chat and the pre-submitted questions. So I'm going to go to one of the Q&A submitted questions, which is asking about wins. So can you share some of the small or big wins from your association's role in addressing or resolving the fluid shortage after the hurricane in North Carolina last year?
Sure. So the question is referencing after Hurricane Helene, I believe, the Baxter plant that is in North Carolina was hit. It's one of those, I feel like we've been saying it so much, but one of those once in a lifetime events. That plant is not really in a path where you would have normally expected to see a hurricane. So the fact that it's this is a climate adaptation thing, but that plant is actually pretty far inland and was pretty and kind of on a hill. Those were some of the adaptation measures that they had in place. Things have evolved. We saw a storm move in a path that was atypical, and because of that, we saw a plant that produced a significant portion of the IV solutions for the nation go down. The other compounding factor was the fact that that plant also had a bridge that was required to be able to move product in and out of that facility. In that storm, the bridge went down. So that is a reference to the question. I just wanted to give the context because not everyone pays as much attention to disasters as we do. So that created a shortage of product. That was a huge effort between the federal government, associations, and partners. I give Baxter tremendous kudos for their willingness to share information quickly, to work with us, another trade association that they are a member of, as well as the HHS family, to make sure that they were coordinating on messages that were being sent to providers, but also that they were accepting the help that they thought could actually help to get their facility back online faster. And so as a part of that, what we saw was that allocations that went from 10% right after the storm, because they were saying they're not sure how much available product they're going to have, within days went up to 60%. Some of the things that happened, coordinating with HHS, the Assistant Secretary, the Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response, there was product that was moved actually to other facilities to make sure that there could be some protection of product. There was a lot of coordination with the FDA. We, as HDA, are members of the Healthcare and Public Health Sector Coordinating Council. And so there was a lot of public-private information sharing that was happening, but also making sure that we were communicating what the allocation decisions were so that we were able to ensure that providers understood what was happening. I think it's one thing to deal with the change. It's another thing to not know that the change is coming. And so part of what we try to do is communicate that those allocations were being decided by the manufacturer, and that as we got a better picture of what was evolving and how quickly they could resume operations, that they would be able to make changes. Another thing that we supported in coordination with other trade associations was working with the FDA to understand what levers they would actually explore to be able to ensure the flow of product. The FDA actually allowed for temporary importation of some saline products from other countries, approved product that was coming in. That made it easier to make sure that there was product moving in the system. So again, we were paying attention to all of this and paying a lot of attention to making sure that the coordination was able to happen. But this is something that we continue to watch. And as I said, we're seeing an evolving climate. And so as we see the need for climate adaptation, it reminds us that we have to be able to adjust and adapt, because those are sorts of resilience challenges that we may see going forward.
That is spot on. Jadalyn, I saw you unmuted. Did you want to chime in?
Just the added win of also knowing how to respond in these situations and how to be vulnerable. I think that's one of the things we don't talk about enough, is that there's a certain level of vulnerability that is exposed, and how you digest that information and take it in, and as a company, but also as an industry, is important. And I appreciate, I think that's a win for us at HDA, how we always kind of sit in the middle of being able to help people analyze and understand their vulnerabilities. So it's not seen as, this is an isolated situation. This could happen again, and it just doesn't have to be you next time. It could be others. How can we expand this across the entire industry and make sure that everyone learns and takes something from this experience? So
That's so true, and thinking kind of about the different roles in that process. So that's one of the questions that we did receive that I'm going to cover next. It's what other roles are intermediaries doing for state regulation and other potential legal activities between the manufacturer and the pharmacy?
I am going to offer my interpretation of this question, because I may not be answering the question as intended. And so if the person that submitted the question is not satisfied with my answer, just please throw something in the Q&A. So my interpretation of this question is describing some of the functions that we conduct at the state level that may govern the movement of product, recognizing that there are state regulations and laws that play a role in our ability to move the product. And so based on that, my answer is we actually have to have licensure in all of the states where our members are operating. So if we have a member that is operating in 10 states, they have to have licensure in all of those 10 states. We work very closely with states' boards of pharmacy. We also work very closely. We have a state team that is a mighty team of 5 that actually covers the entire nation, and works with state houses to make sure that they are tracking legislation and explaining to legislators the impact of that legislation on our ability to deliver product in that state. That is especially important when it comes to products that may be of key concern. Also, when it comes to strategies that states may take up, like stockpiling, in light of concerns about drug shortages. So those are some of the things that we do. That is actually not necessarily on behalf of a manufacturer, but it's in our role as a distributor, understanding that we have to be licensed by that state. We have to be compliant with those state laws. The guidance is coming from that board of pharmacy, and that is going to allow for us to operate in that state. There are a range of different products where this has continued to come up, but ultimately, that is how we've continued to engage at that state level to make sure that we are compliant with the state law and that we're able to continue to distribute product in those states.
I didn't pose the question, but I think you did an excellent job answering it.
Thank you.
So if the person is in the chat and that didn't cover it, let us know. But if not, we're going to head to the next question, because we want to try to get through as many as we can. I think we're going to be able to do all of them. The next one is, can you speak to the impact on children's hospitals and providers?
Jadalyn, do you want to start that one?
I think from the community level, when we talk about some of the community hospitals and children's hospitals and providers, and the impact of the entire industry, it is not fragmented in a way that it would differentiate from children's hospitals and community hospitals to all hospitals. I don't think we operate in a space where we are moving drugs in silos, more so responding to, like Nicolette was explaining, potential drugs of interest or special situations like shortages and emergency situations. Um, I'll leave it to Nicolette to add more, but I don't think there's any, in terms of our industry and how we work with our key members, there's no influence or impact on children's hospitals in particular.
Yeah. I think something that putting myself in the mind of the person who wrote the question, something that I think is often a concern for children's hospitals is that the unique needs of children's hospitals and providers in those settings are understood and taken seriously. That is something that, as Jalen was saying, we do as a part of how we do business. So a children's hospital is going to be able to have orders and request product that is specific to their hospital needs. So those formulations that are modified, the syringes and things of that nature that are modified based off of the needs of a children's hospital will be met by a distributor. I think something that does come up in the context of just taking it back to disasters is how some of the medical countermeasures and some of the products that are available are translatable into the children's hospital setting. And I know that the HHS family, but specifically the FDA and the Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response, have been working with the private sector on this to try to understand what is the type of guidance that would be needed to make adjustments. What are formulations that we need to consider? So thinking about something like, God forbid, an anthrax attack, right? If we have doxycycline, how do we think about how that doxycycline that might be coming from a stockpile or coming from private sector supply would be able to ensure that that could be broken down for children's formulation? So those are the types of things that are being thought about.
I think that's actually really comprehensive, because oftentimes, to your point, you are making sure everybody, right? We talked about equity, we talked about access, but sometimes when you are that parent or you are looking at that small child, you want to make sure they're getting what they need. So thank you so much. This one you may have answered, but I'm staying true to trying to get them all in. Are there initiatives in North Carolina looking at drug shortages?
Yes, so that I think is connected to that question about the drug shortages that arose there. I will just say North Carolina is an interesting state in that there are a lot of different geographical separations and demographics that exist in North Carolina. And we also see that in North Carolina, the propensity for natural disasters, specifically hurricanes, does seem to continue to be pretty high. And so the work of the state, and I think North Carolina has one of the best emergency management private sector consortiums that we are a part of and continue to work with, led by an incredible woman named Persia Payne Hurley. They do incredible work to make sure that they are understanding what the public health needs are of that state and how they are preparing for any type of disaster that may impact North Carolina. So I think there's a lot to be learned as to how North Carolina in particular is doing it. But just know that there's always much more to do.
Excellent. Okay, we're going to do this next question, which was shared in the chat. And I think we'll be able to do our last one, which is actually about this career field. So kind of a quick round robin, maybe your 60-second response. Jadalyn, can you discuss your work to develop and maintain a system that allows regulators and dispensers to electronically check to see if a product is legitimate or counterfeit? And how has it been used recently to protect patients?
I will quickly jump into that because this kind of goes into the electronic question that you were asking about. A lot of what we do is trying to maintain these systems and these technologies that allow us to verify product. Is it good? Is it legitimate? Right now, I convene a group of solution providers that have developed a solution called the verification router service, where they can scan the barcode on a drug product and know whether or not this drug is safe to distribute or to dispense to the patient. And a lot of interest right now in regulators to make sure that when they're interacting with drug products, whether it's something like we talked about DEA agents, if they find a drug product on the street, they're able to scan and figure out where this drug product came from, who produced it, or if it's a regulator that's just in a pharmacy and testing to make sure that the product on the shelf is a legitimate product, that they have access to quickly scan a product and understand the status of that product. So that's some of the technology and the innovation that we are working through right now at HDA with our VRS provider network.
All right, I'm going to try to push it and get this last one in, which is it possible to transition to this field without industry experience? I'm not sure which one you want to prefer,
Yes.
but I know, Nicolette, you have the background. Jadalyn, you already shared you really didn't, and you're still here. And I'll share the Career Center link in the chat again. So I'll let you go.
Yes, I think that's a quick answer. The answer is yes, absolutely. The field is looking for people with a desire to learn, with a willingness to explore, with a hunger for knowledge, a desire to help people. No one comes in off the street knowing distribution. So it's a foregone conclusion that everyone is going to have to learn it once they enter the field. So absolutely is the answer.
All right, that's excellent. So if anyone would like to connect with Jadalyn or Nicolette, you can share your information in the chat. We thank you so much for your time. There's been great feedback as well in the chat. And I think that this was helpful. One, it's your information is helping people learn, but also I think really humanizing the work that you're doing. So thank you and kudos to you. This was a great way for me to spend my Friday afternoon. And everyone have a great weekend. Take care.
Thank you. Have a good one.